Going to be a busy week in the impeachment inquiry. Key figures in the Ukraine scandal will be speaking to Congress every day for the remainder of this week, starting tomorrow with U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Bill Taylor. Taylor's text with another central figure, U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland. They're getting a ton of attention, especially this exchange. Taylor sent this to Sondland, quote, "As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign." 5 hours after he sent that, he got a response from Sondland, who had spoken to the president in the interim. He wrote, "Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind," as though a lawyer had written that text for him. The quid pro quo they are talking about has been repeatedly denied by the president, but last week, Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney did something interesting. He told the truth.
What you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happens as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. And I have news for everybody. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy.
A couple of hours after that, Mulvaney said he didn't mean it and then blamed the media for misconstruing the comments that came out of his mouth. Then yesterday on Fox News Sunday, the damage control tour continued.
You again said just a few seconds ago that I said there was a quid pro quo. Never use that language, because there is not a quid pro quo.
You were asked by Jonathan Karl, you've described a quid pro quo, and you said that happens all the time.
And reporters will use their language all the time. So my language never said quid pro quo.
Let's get some analysis on that and where the impeachment process stands. For that, we turn to former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi. Gene, let's begin with the deposition schedule. Tomorrow we've got Bill Taylor, the de facto ambassador to Ukraine, who's also the guy on the text thread with Gordon Sondland, saying at least twice that he thought we were holding our aid to Ukraine hostage in exchange for help with election investigations. The rest of the week, more people connected to Ukraine on a lower level with smaller profiles. What, to your mind, is behind this slate of witnesses? What is the committee trying to discover and establish here?
Well, what I would say is that with Bill Taylor and the others that they're calling, that's establishing what happened before that famous call and also what happened after that call, because the before and after of that call are crucial. What they're trying to establish, if I were on that committee as counsel, would establish that what happened on the 25th between President Trump and the president of Ukraine was not just something that came out of the blue. There was a before and there was an after. And Bill Taylor and the others are going to establish that this alleged scheme, conspiracy, was something that was concocted in January or February of this year. It just wasn't something that came up in the phone call.
Which begs the question, how much proof do they really need? I mean, we've got the Ukraine call and the transcript that indicates a quid pro quo. We've got the text messages that also indicate a quid pro quo. Mick Mulvaney essentially confirmed it at his press conference, even though he tried to walk it back. Look, I know 35% of the nation isn't going to believe anything bad about Trump, even if the investigation produces a literal smoking gun. But what's the threshold for the proof of this committee, and who are they trying to convince here?
Well, they're trying to convince the American people, number one, and they're also trying to convince the Senate. But there is no burden of proof, if you will, like in a criminal case. It's just whatever the public and the senators are going to believe, whatever standard they use. But why is it important to have what I call corroboration? Because Trump basically is saying, President Trump is saying that I really didn't mean it as a quid pro quo. And then Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney said last week and then yesterday that, I didn't really mean it either. So Bill Taylor and those other witnesses are going to add meat to the bones that there was a high level of premeditation and calculation before and after that call. That's why Taylor could be one of the most important witnesses.
So you're saying it's not just the facts of the case that we know so far, it's the reasoning behind them and what motivated the president or the other people who were involved in this? That's a key to proving that this was more than just a one-off phone call?
Yeah, absolutely. If it were a one-off phone call, we would not have impeachment proceedings, because Trump just thinks off the top of his head. He could say, oh, it just came into my brain, which is possible. but Bill Taylor et al. Are going to show that there was a reason. This was arms for dirt, pure and simple, arms for dirt to help the president's election prospects, to dig up dirt on Joe Biden and his son, period. That is an abuse of power.
I want to go back to Mick Mulvaney's press conference on Thursday. We know the PR impact. It's not good for the White House. It may eventually cost him his job. Does his statement, especially considering that he walked it back or tried to, have any teeth when it comes to the impeachment process?
Oh, I think Mulvaney's statement, Chief of Staff Mulvaney's statement, is powerful evidence as to what they actually were thinking, and number two, how cavalier they are with what they're alleged to have done.
All right, let me move on to the Rudy Giuliani stuff because it's a little confusing. We know his associates were arrested. It can be a little complicated. It's a little hard to follow. And at a glance, it doesn't necessarily seem to be on the same line of topic as the rest of impeachment, although I know that's not really the case. One of the guys who was arrested as a Rudy associate, Lev Parnas, we've seen photos and reporting, long history with both Rudy and with Trump. He was Rudy's guest at the George H.W. Bush funeral. What do we know about those associates and how they fit into this puzzle, what they might tell us, and really, how much trouble is Rudy Giuliani in at this point?
I got to tell you this. I think Rudy Giuliani is in potentially very deep trouble because Lev and Igor, okay, and they're not characters in the 1965 movie Dr. Zhivago. Lev and Igor are everywhere. They're like Forrest Gump. They show up whenever some trouble is occurring. And here's the problem with Rudy Giuliani. The indictment that came out of the Southern District of New York is that there was a Russian financier who was funneling money to Lev and Igor to endorse and fund Republican causes. And the allegation is that Rudy Giuliani possibly may have been part of that. The other problem with Lev Parnas is he was an interpreter, as I understand it, for negotiations or discussions between Rudy Giuliani and Ukrainian officials. And that is just a very bad optics problem at best, and at worst, it's criminal because it involves federal election crimes, it involves the quid pro quo of the arms for dirt, it involves a lot of other things, money laundering. So for Rudy Giuliani, the punchline is this: he potentially is in very serious trouble.
Let me move on to the Trump doral, the short-lived G7 at Trump doral. He pulled it back, but it was a pretty obvious gambit for self-enrichment. In addition to Trump's D.C. hotel, his money from golf rentals, sending Pence and the Air Force to Trump properties, his kids profiting from their father's time in the president, and more. That feels impeachable to me, even though he called off the G7. To your mind, should emoluments and the self-dealing from this president be a part of impeachment?
I think so, yes. If he had not called it off, it would have been a very strong article of impeachment. But what happened was he attempted, actually, he closed the deal, he just backed off. So, you know, you can't rob a bank, return the money, and say, don't charge me. He clearly violated the emoluments clause because that directly, indirectly benefited him. And they didn't have a competitive process. In June of next year, that is the worst season for country clubs, because who the heck goes to Florida in June and July? Nobody. So that emoluments clause could have been and still is a basis for an article of impeachment. I predict there are going to be 4 articles. They're going to vote by end of Thanksgiving, early December.
Finally, Gene, I want to hit you with a hangover question from the Mueller investigation, because we got word from the Justice Department over the weekend. They confirmed that neither Don Trump Jr. nor Don McGahn, the former White House counsel, sat for the Mueller grand jury. Now, McGahn may not have needed to. He gave plenty of hours of interviews, but Jr. seemed like a pretty key player. There's been some speculation that Mueller didn't pursue them because Bill Barr had already taken over as AG and somehow blocked his access or otherwise threatened the investigation. What's your take on that discovery over the weekend? Were those omissions important? Is this just another black eye from Mueller, or does this open up other questions for you?
Okay, I have praised Robert Mueller in extremis. I think he's terrific. I got to criticize them a little bit. They should have been more aggressive in making the President of the United States do more than just interrogatories, written answers. They should have had an FBI interview like George W. Bush did, like Cheney did, and Bill Clinton was in front of the grand jury. So I think they could have been stronger on President Trump. On McGahn, I think they got what they wanted from McGahn. It was 30 hours of interviews with the agents. They didn't need to put him in the grand jury. On Don Jr., here's the thing. It looks like he did plead the fifth, but I would have considered giving him immunity because this was too important and you had to make a judgment. I would have given Don Jr. immunity. If he goes before the grand jury and he lies, he's subject to perjury. So I kind of criticized them for not going down the avenues that I would have done if I were leading this investigation. But I still think Robert Mueller is a class act and an American hero.
So many moving parts to all of these stories, both old and new. And thanks to Gene Rossi, former federal prosecutor, for helping us sort through them. Gene, thanks.
Thank you.
And up next, a top official at the Obama State Department joins us to look at the state of President Trump's foreign policy and what he has to say about it, both eye-opening and disturbing.